Hey guys, today's video is about my binding stash. I love keeping a pre-made binding stash because then when I'm finished with the quilt, I can just grab one. I typically use a half yard. That is because it's enough for a small lap size quilt, which is kind of what I generally use. It can be like up to 63 by about 70 inches. That's a good size. Any larger than that needs to be 3/4 yards. And when I'm shopping for fabrics, if I really, really love it, I'll do 3/4 yards. And then that way, if I have a large quilt I want to go ahead and use that binding for, I'll have the option. And then I also have been working on this quilt. Well, my goal is to work on it this weekend. This is my Starglass quilt pattern. I released it last December. And this is the one I did for the 6-month quilt-along, except during the quilt-along, I also made another version, which was an all neutral quilt, and I made the larger version. So this is the smaller one. I didn't get a chance to finish the smaller one. I did finish the larger one. So this week before my next pattern releases, the one I've been talking about, the Great Scrap Quilt, I wanted to go ahead and just knock this quilt out because I don't like having works in progress, and this is one of the last ones that I have. There's a few other quilts I need to get quilted, so I'm going to be addressing that in the next few weeks as well, but I wanted to go ahead and get this finished this week. I'm going to go ahead now and talk about the fabrics that I have waiting for me to make into a binding for my stash. And then the question I get asked most is, what size strips do I use? So I use 2.5 inches. I learned from Jenny from Missouri Star that just tends to be traditional, but you can also use 2.25 inches, and that seems to be what a lot of modern quilters like because it does give it a thinner frame. I haven't done that yet. I have been thinking about switching to 2.25, but what I think I'm going to do at some point in the next few weeks is make a small quilt sandwich and then do 2.5 and 2.25 and compare it. And of course, I'll film it and I'll make a video, show you guys what the differences are, what I felt about it. I do know that 2.5 inch is really great if you're a beginner because it gives you more wiggle room for error. You don't have to be as precise with your sewing, and it's just going to have plenty of room for the binding. But let me go ahead and show you the fabrics I have found. Here's my pre-made binding stash. It's just in a copper bowl. I found it in an antique shop. I keep it in my cabinet on the very top of it, and I just make a bunch of binding. So when I make a quilt, I try to make the binding first because I like to bind, but when I'm done quilting with it, I really just want to get it done quickly. So making the binding at the end was kind of a drudgery. And then I read in a tip, I think it was All People Quilt magazine, and they did it at the beginning, and I loved that. The other thing is that I started collecting stripes for a binding because I love a stripe binding, and whenever I find a good stripe, I pick it up. So these are binding spools, and I found them at this Etsy shop, Squirrel Co Quilts, and she prints them on cardstock. She has a couple different types. I stocked up because I just love them so much. So I have a couple already made. I've actually used quite a few of these. And then I also have a scrappy binding spool. So anytime I have some binding left over, I add it to this spool. And it's turning out to be such a beautiful scrappy binding. I love it. And you can see I use stripes a lot because there are a ton in there. So I had been picking up a lot of stripes, and I thought maybe today would be a good day to go ahead and get some of these made. Let me go through a couple of them. I picked these ones that are my most recent. We went last week to Indianapolis, and I visited a quilt shop there called Quilt Quarters, and they have just such a fabulous selection. But this binding is a wider stripe, which I haven't seen a lot of. They're traditionally pretty thin, and it is not uniform. You can see it's meant to be a little bit off, which I liked, and it's white and green. I just thought it was a super fun stripe to do. And then I also picked up a traditional green and white stripe. I just loved this darker tone of green in it, and then the not crisp white, it's just like an off-white. I thought that was a good one. And then here's a stripe with a stripe. I think the dotted lines add a certain amount of a modern touch to this quilt, and I think that this could be a really good modern binding. And then I had this chocolate one because I thought when I made my Knitted Star fall version, I would want a stripe binding, but in that case I decided a solid brown binding was going to be the best. So I actually don't know in what quilt I would use this again, but you never know. And then of course a silver thick thin kind of alternate stripe. And something about diagonal stripes make it super fun when you have a stripe binding and it's just, you know, this little piece, but they're on a diagonal. It's a black and white, very basic. I loved it. And then I have a tan and white stripe. I've been really drawn to traditional fabrics lately and traditional styling. I think probably because that is the direction of our home. And I tend to make quilts for spaces in my home or inspired from spaces in my home. So I've been picking up a lot of traditional feeling stripes. And then a black and white stripe. You can never have enough black and white stripes because they just go great with everything. They can be a modern frame for a very colorful quilt. It can be kind of just a calming down for a scrappy quilt. It can be an exclamation point on a floral quilt or pastel colors. It's just so versatile. And then this one was like a charcoaly faded. So it's showing up pretty true black on the screen, but it's actually not. It's like a grayish black, and I liked that kind of worn look to this fabric. And then Lella Boutique, her folktale line, she had the most beautiful stripes in quite a few colorways, and I actually picked up most of them and have used quite a few of them because I just loved it so much. This is a dark brown, but because it's such a fine stripe, I just think that makes it, I don't know, I really, really like this print the way it goes. And you can see I have another one here actually from the same line. She did this pink, but it's not a traditional pink where it's bubblegummy. It's really just a nice soft rose color. So this would be great for a good picnic quilt or a spring, lap size. And then someone had sent me these. I don't make nautical inspired quilts, but I do follow Susan Ake on Instagram, and she makes the most amazing nautical inspired quilts because she lives on the coast in Florida. And I think, someday this could be a really fantastic, both of these could be great fabrics to use as bindings. And then I love seasonal quilts. I've mentioned it before. So when Stacy Shu came out with a seasonal binding, or what I saw as a binding, a seasonal stripe to go with her Halloween line last year, I had to have it for a binding. And I actually have the Halloween fabric that she used with this. This is ready to be bound. I have the quilt, it's been quilted, and I haven't bound it yet. So this is probably the first one I need to make so I can get that quilt bound. And then I have this line, Stacy Shu again. She's one of my favorite fabric designers from Moda. She just knocks it out of the park with every line. This is from a line called Go Cargo, and I haven't used it yet, but I have the binding because I want to make something with that fabric line. And then she had like the little road stripe on a diagonal, which I thought was just super fun. And then this one is like a kind of a shirting stripe. Again, it was just super classic, traditional. I thought this would make a great men's inspired binding. And then a gray and white stripe as well. I also picked this one up when we were in Indianapolis because I'm making the Great Scrap Quilt, and I thought this would be a good match. But when I held it up, it really was too much pink in there. So I've actually found another stripe I'm going to order from Etsy, and I forget what line. Oh, it's from, I'll have to look it up. I can put it on the screen. But anyway, this is not going to work, but it's a great Valentine's kind of binding. That's what the line it was from. I believe it's another Stacy issue. She had a diagonal stripe for her Valentine's line, and I thought this would be just a great binding to have. And then what I'm going to work on right now, this is another one from Lela Boutique. It's the same Folktale line. You can see it's just that fun, super skinny stripe, and then it has this light kind of cloud blue color to it. I really loved the tone in this one. So I'm going to go ahead and get cutting this. But you might be asking, well, how do you know what size binding to make? Depends on the size of quilt, right? They can range. I rarely make more than a lap size quilt, and a half yard tends to be just right for me. I do occasionally buy more than a half yard. If there's a stripe I really like, I'll buy 3/4 of a yard because I can always make it smaller if I need to. You can't make it larger. So I'll do a half yard and 3/4 yards. 3/4 yards tend to be good or enough for larger quilts. So that's what I do. Again, some people just make large quilts, so you'll have to take that into consideration if you want to start building your own binding stash as well. I cut my strips at 2.5 inches. You can kind of do it a little thinner. I know a lot of modern quilters are doing 2.25 inches. That's gonna leave you a much thinner binding. I think for me 2.5 works, although sometimes I have wished I had 2.25. So for now I'm at 2.5. I may change at some point, but that tends to just be like the go-to. When you're cutting for the stripes, you're just going to cut it just like it's normal fabric. The way that I like my stripes to line up. I don't want them to go this way, right? I want the binding to go this way. And that's how most of the stripes tend to be printed. You're just going to lay it out, and then you're going to cut your stripes just like this. I'm going to go ahead and cut these all into strips, and then I will show you how I make my binding. So the key with binding is kind of understanding the process. And when I first started, it was easy for me to get this part, but the finishing binding was actually pretty hard because I didn't understand the process. So long as you're consistent, I feel like you can get it. So I always start first piece left to right, second piece on top. Right where it joins from here to here is where we're going to sew. The reason why we sew on the bias, which is one of the things I didn't understand as a new quilter, is because it's less bulk. If you were to sew this way, okay, you have your seam, you're going to have this. When you open it up, right, you're still going to have the whole seam. And then when you fold it in half to make your strip, you now have 4 layers of bulk. So that's going to show. In quilting, like with all things, we want to reduce the thickness. We want to reduce the bulk. So when you sew this way, as I fold it in half, I'm not going to get any more than just the 1 layer. So let me go ahead and show you. You can use tape if you need to. For me, I've become experienced, so I just need to sew a straight line from that X to this X, and that makes it easy. Then I trim my threads. This is how it's going to go. So it creates a straight strip. So you can see the stripe continues the same direction when you join it this way. And when you fold it, it's going to go like that. So you do all of your strips like that. And then at the end, or you can do it as you're going along, you're going to join all your strips, and then you're just going to trim it this way and then 1/4 of an inch. So I will show you that. I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these sewn together, and then I'll meet you back afterwards. I'm just leaving them out, and I'm kind of trying to do 1 or 2 a day when I get time to sew. And then I upgraded it from my copper bin to this glass jar. It's with my scraps. This was the blue jar and it was mostly empty, so I just moved those to a different color, and now I'm going to be having my binding strips in there, which I really love the way that looks, and then it's just a little bit neater way to store them.